Hello, thanks for joining us. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. I'm Laura Sellier, and these are the headlines. Heavy airstrikes in Gaza as the IDF targets dozens of the Toyota pickup trucks used by Hamas. A fifth straight day of massive anti-government protests in Turkey. Over 1,000 people have been arrested. And the Sudanese armed forces recapture the presidential palace in Khartoum from the RSF militia. First, Hamas has released a propaganda video featuring 2 of the 59 hostages it's still holding in Gaza. Elkhana Bobot and Yosef Chaim Ohana are seen addressing the camera. I24 News has chosen not to publish the video, which is considered psychological warfare. Well, this comes amid another day of heavy fighting in Gaza. Let's get the latest on that with our correspondent Robert Swift, who joins us now from the border with Gaza. And Rob, it seems those shiny white Toyota vehicles that are favoured by Hamas in their propaganda videos and those hostage handover ceremonies were the target of a lot of airstrikes today. What happened?
That's right. A little bit earlier today, the IDF and the Shin Bet released information on a wave of airstrikes. They said Excuse me, there's another airstrike. They said that they had conducted around about 100 different airstrikes against vehicles, and that included a number of the white Toyota pickup trucks that have become synonymous with Hamas. Now, in fact, there were so many strikes throughout the day that one Gazan journalist advised people to avoid any of these pickup trucks that were in the area. But the IDF has said that it struck vehicles that were connected to Hamas's activities, including their activities on the 7th of October 2023. Those were not the only airstrikes that were conducted. There's also further figures from within Hamas, including Ismail Barhoum, who was killed in an airstrike on Nasser Hospital overnight last night, as well as that 2 journalists, Hossam Shabat from Al Jazeera in the north of Gaza, and Mohammed Mansour, who worked for Palestine Today, which is a TV channel that was associated with Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Both of these individuals were killed in strikes. The IDF has said that both of them were involved in militant activity. I'm just seeing sirens coming in now. Reports of rockets launching in the area of Natif Asara. A reminder earlier today that there was sirens going off in Natif. In fact, yeah, that is indeed. We're having sirens taking place now. Gaza is just over to our left, so if we do see launches, we will let you know. In fact, there's an Iron Dome just going off in the air above my head now. My cameraman's going to turn so that you can see that. So that's immediately over Sderot. There's been one interception. You can see the shrapnel from the interception falling now. That would be, as I said earlier, there was an interception. There was a alarm earlier today in the area of Natif Asara. That turned out to be a false alarm. Clearly, this one to my front was not. That did appear to be at least one interception. I can't say that I myself saw the rocket from the Gaza side. Sometimes we'll be able to see the launches. In this instance, I didn't see that. But clearly, the Iron Dome missile. But clearly, the Iron Dome missile launched there. We'll, of course, give you more updates when we have information on that. All
right, take care, Rob. Thanks very much indeed. Robert Swift there down at the border. And there we saw 2 rockets being intercepted, or at least one rocket intercepted that appeared to have been fired from the Gaza Strip. So that's our Rob Swift with breaking news there. Well, meanwhile, Hamas saying today that it's open to a new Egyptian proposal for a ceasefire. So is the renewed fighting in Gaza bringing the terrorist group back to the table? We're here to talk about that. We're joined by Andrew Fox. He's a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. He's an expert on warfare and a former officer in the British Army as well. Welcome, Andrew. Good to have you with us. So the IDF went back into Gaza a week ago. We've seen very heavy fighting since then. Do you think this is bringing Hamas back to the table to negotiate a ceasefire?
I think it has every chance, and I think the Egyptian deal that's been put forward has been met with relatively positive feedback from Hamas. They certainly maintain that they're open to negotiating. And what we've seen is a very slow series of escalations from the IDF that have just put the squeeze on Hamas. And it started with Mr. Trump's threats. It progressed through to small-scale airstrikes, up to larger-scale airstrikes. Now we're seeing ground forces in action in Gaza. And that is going to be relentlessly putting pressure on Hamas, coupled with the huge casualties they're taking in their command and their administrative structures.
And their political structure now as well over the last few days.
Absolutely. We're in a case similar to Lebanon, where we're getting a new Hamas prime minister every couple of days. And it shows the extent to which Israel was able to saturate the Gaza Strip with intelligence gathering during the ceasefire.
Right. How did that work then? How did that intelligence infrastructure get put in place?
Well, there would have been listening devices. There would have been a variety of high-tech equipment that's been left behind. But on top of that, Hamas have scored own goals here. If we think about those victory parades, if we think about the hostage release debacles when they put those videos out, that's all gatherable intelligence for a military intelligence operative. And so the Israelis would have gained huge amounts of intelligence from those things that Hamas themselves have released.
There are some reports that Hamas is struggling to fight back this time. What is different this time about the IDF's operations?
I think it's the sheer scale of force and the sheer attrition that they've had. We know that Hamas was reduced to some 20% of its trained fighting power prior to the 7th of October start of this war. And yes, of course, they will have filled some of their ranks with new recruits, but these will be untrained. They won't have the fighting expertise that those Nukba forces or the previous Al-Qassam or Al-Quds brigades would have had. So it's very, very hard. If you lose all of your command and control structures and you lose the bulk of your trained fighting force, then it becomes incredibly difficult to take the fight to your enemy.
Do you notice any change in the tactics, in the strategy under the new Chief of Staff, Ayal Zamir, compared with the previous Chief of Staff, Herzi Halevi?
Well, I think the change is not only due to the change in Chief of Staff, it's also to do with the fact that the gloves are now off. The Americans will no longer be putting pressure on the Israeli government to hold back and restrain. Of course, Mr. Biden had an election to worry about, and he had domestic audiences in America that he was concerned about. None of that applies now, and Mr. Trump has essentially given Israel the green light. And you can see how closely America and Israel are now working together by the action that America is taking against the Houthis, the threats they're making against Iran. And we're now seeing this holistic approach to the problem, which we've not actually seen until Mr. Trump took over.
What about the longer-term strategy then? Can you defeat Hamas without taking territory? Because the previous strategy seemed to be go in, kill terrorists, and then get out again. Can you defeat Hamas in the long term if you don't control the territory?
Well, the tricky part of that is defining what we mean by defeat. And I think it's better to frame it in terms of Israel achieving its strategic goals. And those have been the same since the start of the war: to return the hostages, to destroy or dismantle Hamas, and to secure Israel's borders. And those three things, I think, are absolutely achievable. There's a limit to what can be achieved by military force. Some of it will require diplomatic action and negotiation with Hamas, particularly when it comes to hostage release. But I think we're looking in a better place than we have been over the last 18 months today than previously.
OK, Andrew, for now, thank you very much. Stay with us. Well, Egypt says that Hamas has responded positively to its offer of a ceasefire and hostage release deal. The proposal would see Hamas free 5 living hostages per week, with Israel implementing stage 2 of the original ceasefire plan in the second week. Well, let's bring in Hiba El-Qudsi. She's the Washington bureau chief at the newspaper Ashaq Al-Awsat. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Hiba. Good to see you again. So is this a sign... Good to see you. Is this a sign that the renewed fighting in Gaza is bringing Hamas back to the table? And are they now asking the Egyptians to get in there, stop the fighting, so they can have a bit of breathing space?
Of course, Hamas' target is to get some kind of a pause for this fighting, re-establishing its negotiation again, asking for the release of the Palestinian prisoners. That would be an achievement for Hamas. But on the other side, this Egyptian proposal may appeal to the Israeli side, as long as they can ensure the release of some hostages and have some kind of timetable of freeing more hostages on the way. But the problem here is that the right wing in Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition, they are pushing to eradicate Hamas, to push it out of Gaza Strip, to push Palestinian out of it, out of Gaza, like a voluntarily replacement to a third country. And this all makes a lot of, puts a lot of obstacles how to move forward, to release the hostage and find an end to this war.
Right, here, but there are two different. Thank you. There are two different things there. Right, they're pushing Hamas out of the Strip and getting Palestinians to leave, which was actually President Trump's proposal. But when it comes to removing Hamas from the Strip, I mean, the plan that Egypt came up with at the Arab League summit in Cairo earlier this month, it didn't even mention Hamas or how to remove Hamas from the Strip. So there does seem to be a bit of mistrust there, doesn't there?
I agree with you. The Arab Initiative didn't specify what would be Hamas' role after the war, because Hamas is insisting on having the last option they have, which is the hostages, and they are trying to get as much as they can out of it using these cards. So Egypt is trying to find some kind of a mutual space for both sides to get the hostages out, to end the war, to get more Palestinian prisoners out of prisons, to eventually convince Hamas to disarming itself, maybe moving some of its leaders out of Gaza, giving them some kind of security guarantees that they will not be killed, as what's happening right now with the Israeli airstrike targeting Hamas leaders inside Gaza. So Egypt is trying to find some kind of win-win situation for both sides.
And meanwhile, Hiba, we are getting reports that President Trump is ramping up the pressure on Egypt to take in some refugees from Gaza, and Cairo has said absolutely not. They're remaining firm. They will not take anyone from Gaza. We're hearing that the Emirates, the UAE, is now bringing that message to Egypt and essentially setting an ultimatum. If you don't take some people from Gaza, you are going to lose that military aid. I mean, is there any sign that that pressure is having an effect on Egypt?
Yeah, President Trump spoke about this, spoke about how much the United States help Egypt and help Jordan. But the problem now is some kind of security to Egypt to have this huge number of Palestinians in Sinai or anywhere else. So that's why she's pushing for that proposal to find a way to be implemented. On the other hand, the problem here is the U.S. is really supporting Israel, and the other option for Israel, or the purpose of Mr. Ron Dermer, the strategic affair minister, is coming to Washington to convince the U.S. administration to give the green light to this massive ground operation, offensive operation in Gaza. So they are putting a lot of pressure on Hamas, putting a lot of pressure on Egypt, and on the same time going with their plan to push Palestinians for a voluntarily leave, for a voluntarily replacement. And it seems like it's going to be more difficult for Hamas to find a solution other than giving up its arms, disarming itself, and leaving Hamas. The more Hamas refuses to release the hostages, unfortunately, the more Israel has the excuse to go in with this massive offensive, and the more it gives an excuse for U.S. support to Israel to do whatever it wants to do.
Hiba, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. Hiba El-Qudssi there.
Thank you.
And Angie Fox is still with me in the studio. Just on that proposal, originally from President Trump, to depopulate the Gaza Strip, essentially, the Israeli Defense Minister is already working on a plan to help Gazans voluntarily leave the Strip. I mean, where do you see that plan going, if anywhere?
Well, there's a number of really important strategic questions. The first one of which is what happens if people don't want to leave? Are they going to be driven out by force? And I think that will be extremely ethically challenging for Israel to get away with that particular part of the plan. If they go to Egypt, what happens then? We've seen the destabilising effect of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in the past. We know what happened in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan. So there's a really good reason that Egypt is desperate not to take these people, especially in an area where they've already got a bit of Bedouin insurgency happening and serious security concerns. And then finally, if you start putting pressure on Egypt, there's dangers with that as well. Because if you cut aid, if they don't do what you want, then first of all, the last thing we want is the Sisi government to collapse and the Muslim Brotherhood to once again establish their strength in Egypt. We also don't want Egypt to have to turn to somewhere else for that aid.
So do you think President Trump's barking up the wrong tree there?
I think it's a plan that has a number of strategic dangers that need to be properly thought through, and there's very rarely an easy answer to a complex problem.
The other side is, essentially civilians are trapped in a war zone right now. There hasn't been another time that I can think of in history where civilians have been forced to stay in a war zone with no opportunity to leave. And there are polls which show a large number of Gazans would like to leave the Strip voluntarily. The question is which countries would accept them.
Yeah, and that's the issue. You know, there's two sides to this story, and I would completely sympathise with anyone from Gaza that wanted to flee elsewhere. Of course, would they ever be allowed back is one question. And then where would they go? And there's no clear solution to that yet, no matter how much pressure you put on Egypt.
All right, Andrew, thank you. Well, the United States Air Force continues to strike Houthi targets in Yemen and has done for 10 straight days now. The US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz says the strikes have been successful in eliminating many of the Iranian-backed group's senior leaders, along with some of their drone production capabilities. Nasri Nessa has the story.
10 consecutive days of US attacks against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. The last airstrike targeted a building in a civilian neighborhood in Sana'a and killed one person and left 13 others injured, according to the Houthi Health Ministry. A witness at the scene described how a 3-story building with 2 floors above ground and 1 basement was reduced to rubble after being struck.
What was inside? The ceiling totally collapsed. What were they targeting? Missiles, artillery, or soldiers? There was nothing inside but innocent people, including children. It's Ramadan, yet people are still being bombed. The bombings have resulted in countless deaths and injuries.
US President Donald Trump has vowed a deadly force campaign to eliminate the group, though the former spokesman of the Houthis in Yemen, Ali al-Bukhaiti, told I-24 News that these strikes will not affect the Houthis as long there is no international coalition to deal with the latter, as was the case with ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
I do not think this operation will have any impact on the Houthis, because neither the Americans nor the Israelis are able to discover all the Houthis' bases. I do not think such actions would achieve anything significant. As long as there is no international coalition and the Houthis are not treated the same as ISIS and Al-Qaeda were in Iraq, I think this hot operation will only add to the suffering of the Yemeni people.
The United States has not yet released any information on the sites it's striking, though, according to White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, key Houthi leaders, including a top missile specialist, have been killed. On the other hand, the Houthi group's leader announced their readiness to confront Israel in support of Lebanon, making the conflict more complex and expanding, with no solution in sight.
Well, Yemen's Houthi leader has offered to help Hezbollah in Lebanon, where Israeli airstrikes have resumed in the south of the country. Several rockets were fired from Lebanon on Saturday, but Hezbollah has denied responsibility. A fragile ceasefire has been in place since November, and the Houthi leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, said his group stood with Hezbollah and with the Lebanese people. The Houthis are the last intact branch of Iran's so-called axis of resistance. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Dr. Walid Fares. He's He's a foreign policy expert and the author of several books, including Future Jihad, Terrorist Strategies Against the West. Thank you very much for being with us, Walid. Good to see you, as always.
Good to see you.
Is this a sign then of just how diminished Hezbollah is and how the Houthis are now the #1 Iranian-backed proxy?
They may be themselves and the Hashd militia in Iraq now co-presidents of the remainder of the Islamic regime in Iran, militias network in the region, because two things have happened. Number one, 80% or more of Hamas has been eliminated, and the world is waiting for the rest. And what is very important is the limitation of Hezbollah's capabilities to launch an offensive war against Israel. They still have rockets, they still have ammunition, but what happened to them was a disaster. But even beyond that, the fall of the Assad regime and the withdrawal of actual Iran militia, Islamic regime militias from Syria has been the most devastating for the so-called axis of resistance in the region.
And what about the tensions between Syria and Lebanon? We've seen fighting along that border in recent days.
I would use a different language. I would say these are tensions, actually confrontations that started and may grow between HTS, the ruler, the jihadi ruler of Damascus, and Hezbollah. The Lebanese army and the Lebanese government, barely wants to engage in a front that is 10 times or 8 times longer than the front, quote unquote, between Lebanon and Israel. But they have to intervene. But most likely, the Lebanese government will be doing negotiations through the United States, through Europe, maybe through Turkey, to make sure that there are no incidents on the border. But the problem is that Hezbollah continues to control parts of Lebanon, and the HTS consider Hezbollah as an enemy. So there could be a major confrontation between those two forces.
And what is the situation in Lebanon, Walid? Who do you suspect was behind that rocket attack over the weekend? And could it trigger a new round of fighting?
Look, we have discussed this over the years. We even have followed the evolution. None than Hezbollah is capable and willing and strategize to launch rockets from southern Lebanon into Israel. They know what happened to them last time. They continue to put those pressures because probably, on the one hand, a request from the Iran regime, on the one hand. On the other hand, just to remind the US and everybody else that they are still there and would like to have a deal that would maintain their weapons. That's their concern, and at the same time deter Israel from countering back.
I mean, it wasn't so long ago we were talking about the potential for a peace treaty between Israel and Lebanon. I mean, in the long term, under this new Lebanese government headed by President Aoun, do you think that's where we might be headed?
No. I'm going to be very simple. A peace between Lebanon, the government of Lebanon, and the state of Israel, like the May 17 Accord, or a Camp David-like, let alone Abraham Accord, a very positive deal, can only happen when all militias in Lebanon are disarmed. And the biggest militia we know, it's Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is now threatening Lebanese authorities. They have threatened the government, that mounted a campaign against the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, who just said, it's not the Lebanese state that waged that war. You did, Hezbollah, and he's now under threat by Hezbollah. So before resolving the issue of Hezbollah one way or another, I don't see a serious negotiation between the government of Lebanon and Israel over anything below resolving some little points about these positions, the Israeli positions inside Lebanon. That would be the maximum.
So Hezbollah is diminished in the region, but you say that it still has its grip on the internal situation in Lebanon.
You said it very well. He's diminished in the region, very much diminished versus Israel, but they still have enough forces to control Lebanon or part of Lebanon. The price of disarming Hezbollah on the inside of Lebanon is very high, and the Lebanese government, without a strong international support, will not engage in this adventure at this point in time.
Dr. Walid Fares, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
And Andrew Fox is still with me in the studio. And Andrew, of course, the IDF decapitated Hezbollah. It was then diminished further by what happened in Syria. Where do you see the situation going forward?
I think it's going to be, as was just said, exceptionally tricky, because Hezbollah, to maintain their influence in Lebanon, they only need to conduct a sort of domestic terror campaign of assassination and threats against Lebanese government officials. And we've seen the talk of these 3 working groups being set up to discuss IDF withdrawal and prisoner release, etc. This is small fry stuff when it comes to normalisation. And unfortunately, Hezbollah, even though they are no longer a strategic actor with the ability to hurt Israel in the way that they attempted to post 7th of October, they still have that malign influence. And in many ways, Lebanon continues to be a zombie state.
Do you at least see UN Resolution 1701 being properly implemented this time, making the north of Israel a safe place again for people to live?
Well, the issue is that the enforcement mechanism is the Lebanese army, and they still don't really have the capacity, and perhaps not even the will, to take on Hezbollah in a confrontation. The UN doesn't have the rules of engagement they need to take any fight at all to Hezbollah. So it's going to be a matter, I think, of Israel establishing physical deterrence. And we've seen that in the last few days. That was a very aggressive response to those rockets that were fired. And that's really the only option on the table that I see at the moment, is to just keep striking Hezbollah as and when they rear their head.
All right. Andrew Fox at the Henry Jackson Society, thank you so much for coming into the studio. We're going to take a very short break. When we come back, after 5 straight days of massive protests in cities across Turkey, President Erdogan has finally addressed the nation. He accused the opposition of incompetence. We'll talk about that next. Stay with us.
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Bad posture. The ever-increasing hours we spend sitting, working, and even while trying to relax at home is twisting our vertebrae out of alignment and creating strain and pain on muscles, ligaments, and joints. A scientifically designed spine and back support device that uses precision biometric technology to perfectly align the back and spine for all-day comfort and support, creating perfect posture for your back every time you sit down. Now features extra-wide acupressure comfort pads as well as an extended height back panel for even more support, making it perfect for all body types. Also features a precision wing design that perfectly cradles your back and spine with amazing ergonomic support that leaves you feeling refreshed and energized even after sitting all day.
Welcome back. An 85-year-old grandfather was shot dead in a terrorist attack in northern Israel this morning. The killer, an Israeli citizen from the Arab town of Ma'ale Iron, was shot dead by police at the scene. It is the third such attack in northern Israel this month. Our Joe Brown has the story.
An all too familiar scene in Israel.
At 8:45, the Magen David Adom Center received a report about a ramming attack at Tishbi Junction near Yokneam. Large forces of paramedics were sent out to the scene. When I arrived, I saw an injured man near the bus stop with penetrating injuries. We immediately began administering first aid.
On Monday morning, Israeli emergency services were called to Yokneam in northern Israel, 13 miles south of Haifa, after a suspected car ramming, stabbing, and shooting. After ramming his car into a bus stop, the assailant left the vehicle, stabbing a 20-year-old soldier and then stealing his rifle. Video posted to social media shows the assailant, a 25-year-old Arab Israeli from Wadi Ara, running down the highway shooting at cars before being neutralized at the scene by border police officers who were en route to a training exercise. 85-year-old Moshe Horn, who was shot at in his car, was pronounced dead at the scene. The 20-year-old soldier was severely injured and was taken to Rambam Hospital in Haifa. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has blamed the Palestinian Authority and its incitement for the deadly attack. Meanwhile, Hamas has praised the, quote, heroic shooting attack, calling it a response to the Israeli attacks in Gaza and the West Bank. This is the third deadly terror attack in northern Israel in the last month. In late February, a teenage girl was killed and over a dozen were injured in a ramming attack in Paradis Chana, whilst a couple of days later, an elderly Arab Israeli man was stabbed to death in a frenzied attack in a Haifa bus station.
Massive anti-government protests are underway in Turkey for a fifth straight day. It follows the arrest of the popular mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, the main political rival of President Erdogan. More than 1,000 people have been arrested in the crackdown, and there have been heavy restrictions on reporting and on social media. Today, at least 10 well-known journalists were detained. President Erdogan spoke out for the first time about the unrest earlier this afternoon. Take a listen.
Days has shown us the truth again. A country like Turkey has a main opposition party that is too small, too primitive and too weak in terms of foresight, vision and quality. It has become apparent once again that they could not be trusted to run a country, let alone local governments or even a buffet. We will not be a tool for them to turn the power struggles within their party into a matter of our nation. I've called once before and I'm repeating it today. Stop disturbing the peace of our people with provocations. If you have the courage, answer for the corruption, theft, bribes and irregularities.
Well, earlier in the day, Mayor İmamoğlu's wife addressed the crowds in Istanbul. Take a listen. This is Dilek İmamoğlu.
We had a hard day today, for all of us. But what do we say? We will win by resisting. They arrested Ekrem. They do not realize how, in the conscience of millions, this is an unjust and unlawful decision. But the authorities will learn. There is a very deep pain of blatant injustice.
Well, with me in the studio, Dr. Hayatan Cohen. Yana Rochak is a Turkey expert at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. Welcome, Hayatan.
Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. President Erdogan, he waited 5 full days before he spoke out about these pretty massive protests, not just in Istanbul, but in cities across the country. Do you think he underestimated the reaction to Mayor İmamoğlu's arrest?
Well, I really don't think that he underestimated. I think this is a very well-calculated strategy, and he just waited. And, he just adopted the strategy of wait and see. Because, of course, he, I assume that he expected such mass demonstrations, because at the end of the day, you are jailing the most charismatic personality in the entire opposition camp who could really threaten your, chair at the end of the day. And at the end, first, they took him to the custody, then they jailed him. They even tried to tag him with, unbelievable accusations like he became a terror organization leader, a crime leader. And then they made a U-turn and only...
they dropped the terrorism case completely.
Yes, yes. And thanks to that now, the Turkish state will not going to nominate... they are not going to nominate someone else for the Istanbul municipality as a mayor, but instead the vice mayor will...
his deputy will take over.
His deputy will replace him.
Because the timing of this is really interesting, right? Because Imamoglu's party was about to hold a primary contest, and he was expected to win that, and that would have put him on a direct track to compete with Erdogan for the presidency.
If Erdogan could let that happen, we could also see the mayor of Ankara. Maybe he could challenge him as well. But in current circumstances, mayor of Ankara, of course, he's not going to do that. Of course, people will going to unite, next to Imamoglu, and he turned him into a hero. We should also admit this. For him, Erdogan turned these things much more difficult for himself. But we should not underestimate also Erdogan's strategy. At the end, we have 2 more years for elections in Turkey. With this current move, we are seeing that he did eliminate his most important political rival. And when we are looking at the big picture, I really don't think that, yes, these protests are very impressive. I must admit, I did not expect so many people will go to the streets.
The Gezi Park protest, right?
Yeah, but I really don't think that they will be able to change something. And this is the main problem, because at the end of the day, when we are looking at the legislative is controlled by Erdogan, judiciary is controlled by Erdogan. He is the executive himself, right? He is controlling the press more or less. He already deterred the business people. Only 2 months ago approximately, he threatened to jail them. And besides that, because of the coup attempt, we also saw that the Turkish army is no longer functioning as the watchdog of the republic as it was before.
Just
so there are no
on
checks
that.
And balances in Turkey
Right,
anymore.
because the Turkish army historically has been seen as the guardian of the secular nature of the state,
Indeed,
right? And it has been behind coups in the past.
Of course,
but that's changed now.
Of course, we cannot speak about, in a democratic country, you cannot speak about the army as the check and balance mechanism. But in Turkey, it functioned as a sort of check and balance mechanism. But in today's Turkey, you do not have media as a watchdog. You do not have business circles as a watchdog. No army, no press, no judiciary. So I'm asking to you, Laura, as an ordinary citizen, these people, they only have these mass demonstrations and their presence in the city centers. They are not capable of imposing a general strike and paralyzing country's economy, for instance, or shutting down the airports or something like that. I'm asking to you, how will they going to achieve their goals? And let me also add another important thing. Erdogan also, within the years, he also formed his own revolutionary guards. That we all know that he formed the neighborhood Bekçi forces. He has the police special forces. He has his own presidential reinforcement forces. So I'm asking to you, what are all these forces for? Okay, for these kind of occasions. For these kind of occasions, he still did not use them. He's still using the ordinary police forces.
So, you say, similar to the Basij, for example, in Iran.
If the things will get more serious, so he will not hesitate, and he's also going to use these cards as well.
Okay. Just talking about the timing, I mean, the timing is interesting in terms of what's happening on the inside, but also externally, Turkey is trying to move closer to Europe at the moment because Europe needs Turkey's help to defeat Russia in the war against Ukraine. And Turkey have made lots of noises about, Europe, you need us, potentially talking about EU accession talks once again. I mean, this is not the kind of country that could join Europe.
Indeed, we are talking about EU accession talks, but not on basis of values and norms, but instead on the basis of security concerns. Today, most of the countries in the European Union and Turkey are under the umbrella of NATO, right? But after this friction between Donald Trump and Zelensky in the White House, we may see the dissolution of the NATO alliance. And in case of a dissolution of the NATO alliance, the Europeans will have two options. Or they will have their own European Union army, which will not include Turkey, and which will most probably will create a new headache for the European Union. Or they will have a new NATO without the United States, and they may include Turkey.
Turkey's the number 2 in NATO already.
That's why we do not hear any criticism from, a real criticism from the European capitals other than Athens. And Athens is Athens, and because of this rivalry and security concerns between the two countries, so we heard about the Greek criticism, but it is not reflecting the European policy towards Turkey.
If you compare it to previous criticism of Turkey, it is very
muted, isn't it? Of course, it's nothing. I mean, it's nothing. Yeah.
Dr. Hayat Koyen-Roshek, always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, after years in exile, more than 1 million Syrian refugees have returned home following the fall of the former President Bashar al-Assad. Half of them came from Lebanon, Turkey and Iraq, with many returning to destroyed or damaged homes. The UN predicts that as many as 3.5 million Syrians will return to the country this year. The Assad regime did try to lure back refugees in recent years, but once they were home, many faced arrest or forced conscription into the army. Well, to talk more about all of that, we're joined by Omar Al-Muqdad. He's a Syrian journalist and filmmaker. Good to see you, Omar. Thank you very much for joining us. Syria clearly has a lot of challenges. It's going to be a long road ahead, isn't it? But it does look now as though many feel it is safe enough, at least, to return home.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. In fact, yes, the number that you just mentioned might double down before 2025 ends. But again, the current government is still facing a lot of challenges ahead of it. On top of these challenges, the United States sanctions. There are some improvements on the ground in terms of services, security. The interim government is trying so hard to hold the country together, but without lifting the U.S. sanctions, these efforts is going to be useless. I mean, the country can't functioning anymore if the sanctions are not removed. Yes, many Syrians, as I told you before, and remember in one of our interviews, that they are gearing up to go back to Syria, but some of them are laying down and waiting to see some improvements in economy in Syria, so they would lead a normal life, at least in the coming few years, if they are going to leave, for example, Germany or any European country.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some people, we've seen footage of people coming back to suburbs of Damascus and so forth and just discovering piles of rubble where their homes used to be. So it's clearly very difficult. European countries have pledged over $1 billion in aid for Syria. Which other countries are helping?
Well, the major country that's leading the efforts right now is Germany. In fact, Germany is trying so hard to do everything in its power to help the interim government stabilize the country. They've been promising to send aids to some human rights organizations and some aid organizations that will operate within Syria's border. Also, we have the Netherlands has promised to send, I'm not sure about the number exactly, I think 600 million euro, something like this, and many European countries. The European Union in general is promised, but as I said before, some of these promises are to be fulfilled while the United States sanctions is in place. So the pressure now is to remove these sanctions, so the European Union and other countries can deal with Syria as state to state and help reconnecting the central bank of Syria with the economic system, the world economic system, as a normal country.
There are concerns about lifting sanctions on al-Shara's new government, and those, of course, that was exacerbated by what happened in Latakia earlier this month, when we saw Islamist militia, massacring entire families belonging to the Alawite sect. I mean, going forward, of course, there are big concerns about the sectarian violence in Syria going forward. Are you confident that minorities can be protected?
Well, I've been following the news very closely, actually. I've been in contact with some of these people on the Syrian coast, in the coastal area, and in some of these areas where some of these incidents took place. But here's the thing. The interim government has already established and formed an investigation committee, and it's already started persecuting some of these elements who acted in a form of revenge to what happened earlier when Assad regime loyalists attacked security forces by patrol car and killing 15 members. So this is how everything started. But what really gives me some hope that the interim government is not tolerating this kind of incidents, and they are actually cracking down on any sectarian language or anyone who is trying to do harm to any innocent civilian. And I'm watching very closely, and I've been in contact, in touch with some of the security forces leaders, and they informed me that these incidents is not going to be tolerated. We will adopt the zero tolerance policy. That's why I'm really optimistic. And the interim government, as I mentioned before, is open to talk and to listen, to hear anybody, any ideas, and to cooperate with any regional or international power to bring peace and stability to the country. But some countries still has some concerns about the background of some of these politicians now in Damascus. But I hope these mysterious concerns would be like solved pretty much as early as possible. Sorry.
Okay. All right, Omar. Thank you very much indeed. We appreciate it, Omar. Omar Al-Muqdad there.
Thank you.
Now, after 2 years of civil war, the Sudanese armed forces have recaptured the presidential palace in the capital Khartoum from the rival Rapid Support Forces militia. Our Alex Schloss has this report.
The Sudanese armed forces has seized control of the presidential palace in the capital of Khartoum in a major breakthrough after 2 years of intense battles with the rival Rapid Support Forces.
In a timeless, heroic battle, our forces crowned their successes today in Khartoum, where they were able to crush the remnants of the terrorist militia of Dagalo in the areas of central Khartoum, the Arab Market, and the buildings of the Republican Palace, a symbol of the sovereignty, pride, and dignity of the Sudanese people.
The RSF rapidly seized the presidential palace along with the rest of the city after civil war broke out in April 2023 over the paramilitary's objection to integration into the armed forces. The army has long been on the back foot, but has recently made gains and retaken large swaths of territory from the RSF in the center of the country. Meanwhile, the RSF is consolidating control in the west, hardening battle lines, and moving Sudan towards a de facto partition, with the rival government operating in areas it controls.
We are not a parallel government. We are Sudan's government, and we don't acknowledge that there's another government.
The conflict has led to what the UN calls the world's largest humanitarian crisis, spreading famine and disease across the country of 50 million people. Both sides have been accused of war crimes, while the RSF has also been charged with genocide. Both sides have denied any wrongdoing.
Well, joining me now, the former Swedish envoy to Sudan, Ambassador Michael Salin. He's now a distinguished fellow at the SIPRI, that's the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Ambassador Salin. Good to have you on the programme. The presidential palace in Khartoum is now back under the control of the Sudanese armed forces. Tell us about the significance of that when it comes to the civil war as a whole. Does this mean that the fighting is coming to an end, or how do you see it?
I could say a simple yes, but I cannot, because I'm saying, and everyone else following Sudanese events are saying, that this does not mean that there is an end to the war in sight. because there are so many more factors that have to be overcome. Still, I think the significance is that the trends of the war are tilting towards to the side of the official government, and at the expense of RSF, because that has been the trend for a while, and recapturing the capital after it had been in RSF hands so long is quite something important, which will have, I think, also international implications, because it will somehow clarify that you have one government, it has one capital, and so it is seen, I think, symbolically. However, RSF is by far far from being beaten, and it has been strengthening its position in Western Sudan, in Darfur, and in the northwest bordering Libya. And when I say Libya, of course, I have in mind the possible comparison between Libya being divided between two governments in the two parts. The east-west divide of Libya could have some semblance in an east-west divide also in Sudan, in addition to the north-south divide that was part of its history. So significant, but I wonder, and I think that surrounding countries that have been supporting the various sides may be tilting towards recognizing Khartoum now under regular army hands as being the center, and RFS being more marginalized. That's how I read things now.
Well, do you think that we're heading towards Sudan being split as Libya is between two rival governments? Because as you pointed out, you've now got the army making gains in the east of the country. The RSF is in the west, close to the border with Chad. Is that where you see it going? Because, of course, Sudan has already been split in two once before, hasn't it? And South Sudan was created. Is that inevitable?
It's not inevitable, but I see a trend towards that end. And when you compare with Libya, Libya, of course, is not. I mean, it has a UN recognized government in Tripoli, and then it has another government in the east, and that government, General Haftar and his team, are recognized de facto by some. So you have an informal division along those lines, recognized by no one. It's not anywhere near what happened between Sudan and South Sudan, that the international community in the end found that as exceptionally, we have now to accept the partition as a solution. That's what was said then. Maybe some regret it now, I don't know. But I see a distinct possibility, because for the regular army to be victorious in a sort of an all-Sudanese war and then reconquer the whole of the territory and getting rid of RSF completely, I don't see that happening the way I read correlation of forces, at least not anytime soon. So you could have a de facto situation of partition, wanted by very few internationally, but a reality that countries and neighboring countries especially will have to live with. I'm not predicting anything. I'm saying that it is a clearly possible trend, and Libya will be an example.
What does all this mean for civilians? Of course, this is a terrible war. 2 years in, you've got tens of thousands of civilians killed, millions displaced. This is a conflict that gets very little international coverage. Now that the army is more in control, does that at least mean that we'll see more humanitarian aid get to the people?
I fear not. I mean, there have been not endless or innumerable attempts, but there have been several attempts to find some kind of agreement between the two, have them sit together at least in the same house, the way Russia and Ukraine are made by Trump's US to sit at least in the same building in Riyadh. There have been similar attempts, but not strong enough leverage or interest on the part of. And as long as the war continues, although the geography of it is shifting, I don't see, other than emergency ad hoc solutions for humanitarian corridors, but no real solution still in a long time, and this is so sad.
Right, and we're not seeing much of an effort internationally to broker any kind of ceasefire either, are we?
Now, we have seen a number of attempts made by the US, made by Egypt, maybe others too, and there have been. But the problem has been that, unlike in the case of, if we are to compare with Ukraine and Russia, for one, there are other comparisons one might make. There is no strong, prestige-loaded Trump-US determination to make the parties sit together. There have been attempts, but there was always a case that either the one side or the other felt that, oops, this is not the time to sit down, because we are having a sort of a headwind now.
It's not an international priority, is it, clearly, despite the devastating loss of life. Ambassador Salem, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for watching. That brings us to the end of tonight's programme. Do stay with us on I24 News. David Matlin is up next with tonight's edition of The Rundown. Good night.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing I24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News app today.
How do you get your news? How do you know what sources to trust? And to paint a clear picture of the entire story, you need a breakdown of the constant stream of events, top stories, expert analysts, and the best journalists bringing you real voices on the ground. We're breaking it all down on The Rundown. Get the facts, stay informed, and be a voice of reason for the Middle East.
Introducing the brand new I24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions, and expert commentaries, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I24 News Video On Demand app today.
The Israel Defense Force operations in Gaza appear to intensify, with the precision targeting of Hamas leadership and ground maneuvers ongoing, while efforts are still underway to broker some form of a negotiated breakthrough. An 85-year-old man is killed by a terrorist in northern Israel. The attacker himself, a citizen, eventually stopped in his rampage by a group of police officers passing by. And the domestic political situation in Israel continues to boil, with the government defying mass protests to push through the ouster of the Shin Bet security chief and attorney general, while working to pass a contentious state budget before the deadline. And we are under air raid alerts as we speak here in Israel. Just as I'm jumping on air with you live from Tel Aviv, I'm David Matlin. This is The Rundown, and we are again under live fire from Yemen as we speak here. Now, the sirens sounding out across central Israel. We're waiting to see if they affect the exact area where we're sitting right now, but this has been the case for many days on end in recent time now, as ballistic missiles continue to be terrorizing the state of Israel, mostly intercepted, I should say, as they approach the country here, though the fallout from such fast-moving, large explosive devices now could still affect large swaths of central Israel. And continually we see the sirens going off across all the major community centers and population centers around central Israel, from Jerusalem on through into Tel Aviv. So again, that's happening right now as we speak. We'll get a few more details on that. Again, this coming on the heels of 2 rockets that were intercepted from Gaza also this last hour, as the Israeli military moves to expand its renewed offensive across the Gaza Strip, launching targeted precision strikes on a rolling list of senior Hamas officials, leaders of the terror organization's political, financial, and educational branches. It's out of the 20 members of the Hamas political bureau elected back in 2021, 11 have been assassinated during the war in Gaza. 4 of them killed just since last Tuesday. The others thought to be in exile. Now, Israel resumed airstrikes after an impasse around the ceasefire. Has also indicated it's preparing to expand ground operations, redeploying an armored division that had been stationed on the border with Lebanon, a front that once demanded over 60% of Israel's forces. And again, bringing you back around to the immediate. You see here the scenes in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv here now as air raid sirens again sounding out, sending millions of Israelis at this very moment into shelter. From what we can tell, again, and we'll keep you updated on this as the details emerge, likely another ballistic missile being shot from the Houthis in Yemen at Israel. And so I bring you into our studio here, our correspondents with us, our security analyst, Yaakov Lapin, and our correspondent, Balir Sladin. Balir, first of all, what just happened as we're coming on air here right now with the sirens blaring at the same time? What's the latest?
About 2 minutes ago, sirens all over the central area of Israel, Gush Etzion, and also the Sharon area. Apparently, 1 ballistic missile that was fired from Yemen now is intercepted over Herzliya, just north of here, about a couple of kilometers from
Israeli
here.
Airspace this time, from what we can tell.
Yes, in the Israeli airspace, because we get some videos actually of the interception, or at least for the rocket itself, or the missile itself, excuse me. Also seen from Jerusalem. So we're talking about this time a missile that did actually infiltrate Israeli airspace. Unlike the others that were fired the past few days, they were all intercepted outside of Israeli airspace. This time it reached the Israeli airspace, infiltrated it, and now it is apparently intercepted by the Israeli air defense systems above Herzliya, a couple of kilometers north of here, and we're waiting for the official statement by the IDF, of course.
Well, certainly we'll follow up on any of the details around this, fitting in line with one of the major aspects of the story we're here to cover tonight, the Houthi. And I'm tempted to say we'll come back around to the Houthi later on in the broadcast. Right now, I guess they're reminding us that they belong up front in our news broadcast here. But Yaakov, looking at the events up until this minute, again, we're reminded of the Houthi threat, and that, again, is something we're set to talk about at length in this show. But the Gaza front seeming to be the impetus, the driver of all these right now. From Yemen, the rocket fire coming in from Yemen, missile fire coming in from Yemen, a direct line linkage to the campaign in Gaza. What kind of impact, as I detail some of the hits that the IDF has been making on this sort of political echelon of Hamas, what kind of impact does it appear the IDF is having in Gaza this week?
I think the impact is wider than what a lot of the public perceives. The number of precise eliminations of members of both Hamas's military wing and political bureau has been very high. And, if we just run through some of the names in recent days of senior Hamas members who've been eliminated, we've got Ahmed al-Shimali. He was the deputy commander of Hamas's Gaza brigade. That's a senior terrorist. We have a commander of Hamas's Shajaya battalion. Now, what's also interesting is the fact there's also a member of Hamas's intelligence branch who was killed in recent days. So these are very painful hits. But as you mentioned at the introduction to this program, there is a growing number of Hamas political bureau members being eliminated. And it's important to point out why, because the Hamas political bureau is the main way that Hamas wants to rule the Gaza Strip through its political regime. And the political branch has direct ties to the military branch. There's no way to actually separate them. They're completely part of one organic organization. So, part of the organization for the 7th of October came from the so-called political branch, and the internal security forces of Hamas, which are used to maintain iron grip control over the Gaza Strip, work hand in hand with the terrorists who crossed the border on the 7th of October. So this is an all-out attack on Hamas's political and military terrorist wing. And, the killing of the so-called Hamas Prime Minister, Bahoum, at the Nasser hospital, who only last week replaced the last Hamas member who was acting as the so-called Prime Minister. So Israel is sending a very clear message here. They're tracking all of these members. They're using precise firepower, and they're coming down hard on the political and the military branches as the ground offensive is gradually, slowly expanding in southern Gaza, central Gaza, and in northern Gaza. We've got IDF troops active on the ground in all three locations, so the pressure is on.
One could argue, perhaps for the first time even in this year and a half of conflict, that the IDF's declaring this Hamas administration is over on all levels. I want to cut in here again at the top of our broadcast, being hijacked by the Houthi from Yemen here. This is video that emerged from just a few minutes ago, truly minutes, as we were coming on air. And this ballistic missile coming in from Yemen, again intercepted by Israeli air defenses. They're the top tier of the Israeli air defenses, the Arrow system, going into action against these very high altitude, fast moving and large explosives coming in the form of ballistic missiles from Yemen. So this one again intercepted as it came in, nonetheless, sending millions of Israelis to shelter. As we speak, likely they're all still in shelter, following the home front guidelines of at least 10 minutes in shelter. Certainly, when it comes to these large ballistic missiles, even pieces of which, as they get shot out of the sky, can be flying into all the cities around the central part of the country. So this is a major issue. And again, millions of Israelis, my own family included, taking shelter at this moment. Yes, Yaakov.
And we can update now that the IDF is saying that that missile fired by the Houthis in Yemen has been intercepted prior to entering Israeli airspace. So we've got the all clear.
And again, just to explain why that affects, no matter what, still affects
Jordan,
the fallout.
Actually,
so someone is intercepted coming in from Jordan.
Yes, of course. When you look at a missile that's coming from very far away, so it is likely to see it very close. In fact, it's not. Apparently, it was intercepted, as Lapin has said here, outside of Israeli airspace over Jordan. This time closer than Saudi Arabia's airspace, of course, in the recent days. And by the way, MARA spokesperson just said that there are no, of course, casualties or any people that were injured during this attack.
And that, of course, again, the latest now, this is a missile from Yemen. If you're just joining us or emerging from your shelter here to fill in, the Houthi in Yemen again firing a ballistic missile with the fallout affecting large swath of central Israel, though it was intercepted. So again, we'll keep you all updated on the various developments around that situation. We start out focusing on Gaza as well. If we bring this back around to that situation, which is the source of much of this right now, Balir, despite the expanded ground operations, the expanded list of Hamas officials being targeted, what are the latest reports around proposals on the other side? We see Egypt inserting itself again into the mix, trying to work something out with Hamas. How's Hamas reacting? What's on the table right now in terms of an alternative to more warfare?
Yes, lots of reports in recent days about an Egyptian effort to go back to the ceasefire, to resume the entry of aid into the Gaza Strip, and of course to release some of the Israeli hostages. According to the latest reports, we see that Israel is trying to present to Hamas a ceasefire agreement for several weeks in exchange for the release of 5 Israeli living hostages, including Idan Alexander, the American-Israeli soldier. And, of course, they will get hundreds of prisoners, they are saying, and, of course, the re-entry of aid or the allowance of the aid to enter the Gaza Strip once again. An Israeli senior official told I-24 News that Israel did not get an offer. They deny getting that offer. And Israel, anyway, won't actually accept the release of 5 hostages only. They are sticking with the Witkoff outline, the special envoy to the Middle East. They are saying that Hamas should release at least half of the living hostages, 10 living Israeli hostages, and also half of the bodies of the Israeli hostages in exchange of that ceasefire agreement, temporary truce. Let's call it by its name. And this is very important because Israel, of course, is not agreeing to end the war completely with Hamas in power. We see that in the defense minister's statement in recent days. He said that we adhere to the proposal of the U.S. President's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, for the release of all Israeli hostages, dead and alive, in advance and in 2 stages, with a ceasefire in between, without endangering Israeli security interests. Other words, we want to reach all of the 3 goals of this war.
Tall order, and I think all this sort of underlined the fact that Witkoff himself still indicating that the talks have a chance. In other words, so we're still seeing what's being worked on with this. Look, to get more from the war front there, and there's been developments around Gaza in the last hour. We go to our correspondent down there on the border area here, Robert Swift. Look, Israeli troops. Well, first I want to back up, Robert. I know in the last hour you were directly under an interception that took place as we talk about these 2 rockets that came in. Unusual. We haven't seen a lot of rocket fire emerge from the Gaza Strip since this offensive kicked in just about a week ago. But some of it came right over your head a short time ago. So I want to get your thoughts and sort of reports on what's happening along the front. But at the same time, we're looking at a situation here where Israeli troops have largely been freed from the northern border. Now resupplied as well. All options appear to be on the table for Israel, targeting Hamas leadership, recapturing parts of the Strip. If I'm summarizing this right, what does this offensive look like to this point, 1 week in, Rob?
Yeah, so let's start with the launch out of Gaza. Just an hour ago, 2 rockets targeting one towards Sderot and the other to communities just to the north of there. That's the rockets that we saw intercepted. Off the back of that, over the last hour or so, we've seen it, or rather we've heard increased air activity, both in the form of drones and in the form of increased number of airstrikes. Now, that may be unrelated to the launch, or it could be the IDF seeking to put an end to that attack. With regards to the ground operations, the IDF, as we've been hearing tonight, continues to have troops in the north in the areas of Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, and some of the fighting that we're hearing from the position where we are is likely connected to that deployment on the ground. We heard small arms fire taking place there earlier. Just a second ago, I heard actually what sounded like an Apache's minigun. So that is potentially all part of that activity there in the northern part of Gaza. But further south in the Netzarim corridor, that is a key objective for the IDF as it looks to cut the Gaza Strip in half once again, which will allow it to have additional control over its manoeuvring within the Gaza Strip for additional operations. And of course, as you've been reporting on, airstrikes have taken place throughout much of the Gaza Strip, many of them conducted overnight, but some during the day as well. And these are all part of the IDF's attempts to eliminate as much of the leadership of Hamas as possible. With regards to the resourcing of the IDF, look, Hezbollah has for a long time, until very recently, been seen as one of the major threats facing Israel. And so, of course, throughout this war, large resources were in the north. That situation changed in the autumn. That has freed up additional resources that the IDF can concentrate here in Gaza. And that may explain some of the confidence with which the IDF is going into the Gaza Strip. Just to caveat that, of course, there is still the West Bank, where security operations are ongoing, and that will require resources from the IDF. And of course, there is, as we've discussed previously, there is the issue of the capability of the reserve forces to continue supplying as much troops as they have done throughout this war.
Robert Swift, thanks for giving us the updates from the front here. Again, not a quiet place in the last hours. Some of that action taking place just over your head here, Rob. Again, a fluid situation there. Appreciate the reports from the border region. We'll come back to you. Now, again, we'll keep our viewers updated. Any of the additional developments coming out of Gaza. And, of course, as we started the show here just 15 minutes ago with a ballistic missile from Yemen coming overhead. So stay tuned for anything else this hour and the hours to come. But on Gaza here, obviously this most sensitive issue in Israeli society, it got a jolt this evening with Hamas publishing its latest propaganda video, we'll call it, showing a sign of life from Israeli hostages. Elkanah Robot and Yosef Chaim Ochana were both kidnapped from the Nova Festival on October 7th and are still being held in Gaza. Now, the video you're seeing here, this is approved by the family for us to show here. That's where it goes first. Families, of course, approving any of these things to be shown, many choosing, yes, to give it out there for that public impact that it may have. Now, Hamas has previously issued similar videos of hostages, apparently seeking to inflame the Israeli public, and what many here see for its deplorable psychological warfare. At least 20 Israelis are thought to still be alive in Gazan captivity. Now, since the October 7th surprise attack that initiated this current conflict between Israel and Gaza, I-24 News has reported extensively on the various controversial reports put out by the United Nations. And when it appears that UN officials would rather not comment, our senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim makes it his mission to press for answers on the most contentious of their predictive reports. Now, here's Mike with the latest from the UN.
Well, as some pundits warn of deteriorating food conditions again in Gaza, the United Nations is refusing to verify that a Gazan famine, which was trumpeted for a year and a half by senior officials, ever actually took place. The head of the United Nations World Food Program, Cindy McCain, declared in May 2004 that northern Gaza had entered, quote-unquote, full-blown famine. In March of last year, Matthew Hollingworth, the WFP's interim director for the Palestinian territories, proclaimed, quote-unquote, famine is a reality in the Gaza Strip. 2 months prior, Martin Griffiths, then the UN emergency relief chief, said the Israel-Hamas war had brought famine to Gaza with, quote, such incredible speed, unquote, asserting that, quote, the great majority of 400,000 Gazans deemed at risk by UN agencies to be at risk of starvation are, quote-unquote, actually in famine, not just at risk of famine. Those assertions have had enormous diplomatic, legal, and societal consequences and led in part to the International Criminal Court arrest warrants issued for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. But the figures those people relied on were repeatedly retroactively revised, and a good chunk of them were debunked by a review committee within the agency that compiled them. And now, over 2 months after a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas was implemented, and absent any substantiating data or visual evidence to such effect, UN agencies have gone quiet, dodging our inquiries as to whether and when a famine actually took place. We asked the Office of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres earlier this month what evidence it had pointing to a famine actually occurring in Gaza during the war.
We talked about the very severe risk of famine. Those studies were done by the IPC, which is a group of UN agencies and also a group of non-UN agencies, American, German, Europeans, and others, who've established a scientific method to talk about hunger, to classify hunger, and we stand by their findings. One thing we don't have, we may have, the UN have the world's most recognizable logo, but there's no brand management. There are a lot of people who can speak on, quote unquote, behalf of the UN. I'm speaking on behalf of the Secretary General, what we've said here, and what others have said.
UN News Center. I'm not talking about the special experts or anything. I'm talking about the UN Central News Center. Reported extreme hunger and famine. Well,
there's a, we could go on for a long time. There is a qualitative scientific difference between hunger and famine. Famine is a very specific word. We have talked often about hunger in Gaza, and I don't think anyone can dispute that there was hunger in Gaza. and I think we've seen it, and our colleagues, numerous UN colleagues, have come out and spoken to what they've seen with their own eyes. And as for the IPC, I think I've answered that question.
Guterres' office referred us instead to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, known as OCHA, and the UN World Food Program. But lead spokespeople for the World Food Program in Rome, New York, and Washington all ignored our inquiries, asking if the WFP could comment on whether famine had taken place. An assistant spokesperson said that no WFP representative is available to answer that question. The lead spokesperson for OCHA initially told us she would look into the matter, but ignored subsequent communications. A spokesman for the Israeli mission to the UN told us, quote, "The only famine in Gaza relates to the Israeli hostages who have been and are being starved and tortured while in brutal captivity." Reporting here from the State Department in Washington, Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
Another major event here in Israel today. 85-year-old Israeli man, he was shot dead, and a 20-year-old soldier seriously injured by a terrorist on a northern highway. That was this morning. The terrorist himself identified as an Israeli citizen from a northern Arab town. It was a harrowing, multi-phased attack that started with a car ramming, stabbing, and evolved into a shooting rampage before the terrorist was killed by border police who happened to be passing by. Now, our Joe Brown has the full story around this latest attack.
An all too familiar scene in Israel.
At 8:45, the Magen David Adom Center received a report about a ramming attack at Tishbi Junction near Yokneam. Large forces of paramedics were sent out to the scene. When I arrived, I saw an injured man near the bus stop with penetrating injuries. We immediately began administering first aid.
On Monday morning, Israeli emergency services were called to Yokneam in northern Israel, 13 miles south of Haifa, after a suspected car ramming, stabbing, and shooting. After ramming his car into a bus stop, the assailant left the vehicle, stabbing a 20-year-old soldier and then stealing his rifle. Video posted to social media shows the assailant, a 25-year-old Arab Israeli from Wadi Ara, running down the highway shooting at cars before being neutralized at the scene by border police officers who were en route to a training exercise. 85-year-old Moshe Horn, who was shot at in his car, was pronounced dead at the scene. The 20-year-old soldier was severely injured and was taken to Rambam Hospital in Haifa. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has blamed the Palestinian Authority and its incitement for the deadly attack. Meanwhile, Hamas has praised the, quote, heroic shooting attack, calling it a response to the Israeli attacks in Gaza and the West Bank. This is the third deadly terror attack in northern Israel in the last month. In late February, a teenage girl was killed and over a dozen were injured in a ramming attack in Paradis Khana, whilst a couple of days later, an elderly Arab Israeli man was stabbed to death in a frenzied attack in a Haifa bus station.
Leah Sladin in the studio here, our correspondent. Leah, obviously, Israel's fortunate to have so many trained and able, sort of frontline able responders driving by the road to neutralize these attacks, to contain these type of attacks. We see that over and over. But look, this is another attack perpetrated by a citizen of Israel. What do we know about the motivations around this individual, or what may motivate, what brought him out to the streets to do this today? So many people asking that question today.
Yes, definitely. Well, some reports talked about some indication for his allegiance to ISIS. I've seen that. I'm not sure whether that's being seriously considered right now by the Israeli authorities, but that could be a situation that happened before, of course. Now, we should look also on the maybe side that this is happening for the third time in a month by an Arab that is a citizen of Israel.
Is there a pattern here? I mean, does this fit, with a pattern of some kind that you're seeing?
I think that, well, that's first of all saying that no more, or at least the attacks from people from the West Bank are heavily reduced. We don't see much that happening, maybe just inside the West Bank. Maybe it's because of the Israeli operation inside the West Bank, especially in Jenin and Tul Karim and other areas as well, also in Shechem, in Nablus. But regarding the Arab citizens of Israel, at least we see condemnation from senior, from members of the Knesset, from the Arab parties. We see also condemnation from mayors, from heads of the local councils. That's a good thing, of course. That's very important. We've seen that also with the Druze guy about 3-4 weeks ago when he killed another Arab Israeli as well in Haifa. We've seen condemnation from the spiritual leadership inside the Druze community. We've seen that also from Druze political figures. So we see that this is very important. And of course, this is a very serious challenge for the Israeli security establishment. After all, if someone wakes up in the morning, takes a knife, and wants to attack and carry out such an attack, that's something that it's very hard to anticipate.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, follow up any other developments around the wounded in that situation. Now, that's where we move on here, though, as the United States has continued its assault on Houthi targets in Yemen. Fitting again for the way we started our broadcast today, ducking from another ballistic missile from their direction. The U.S. says their goal is to disrupt the Houthi attacks on international shipping routes. But increasingly, the focus appears to be shifting, finally, to their masters in Iran. As our Nasri Nassar brings us the latest report.
10 consecutive days of U.S. attacks against the Houthi rebels in Yemen. The last airstrike targeted a building in a civilian neighborhood in Sana'a and killed 1 person and left 13 others injured, according to the Houthi Health Ministry. A witness at the scene described how a 3-story building with 2 floors above ground and 1 basement was reduced to rubble after being struck.
What was inside? The ceiling totally collapsed. What were they targeting? Missiles, artillery, or soldiers? There was nothing inside but innocent people, including children. It's Ramadan, yet people are still being bombed. The bombings have resulted in countless deaths and injuries.
US President Donald Trump has vowed a deadly force campaign to eliminate the group, though the former spokesman of the Houthis in Yemen, Ali al-Bukhaiti, told I-24 News that these strikes will not affect the Houthis as long there is no international coalition to deal with the latter, as was the case with ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
I do not think this operation will have any impact on the Houthis, because neither the Americans nor the Israelis are able to discover all the Houthis' bases. I do not think such actions would achieve anything significant. As long as there is no international coalition and the Houthis are not treated the same as ISIS and Al-Qaeda were in Iraq, I think this hot operation will only add to the suffering of the Yemeni people.
The United States has not yet released any information on the sites it's striking, though, according to White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, key Houthi leaders, including a top missile specialist, have been killed. On the other hand, the Houthi group's leader announced their readiness to confront Israel in support of Lebanon, making the conflict more complex and expanding, with no solution in sight.
And again, in the studio with our analyst and correspondent here, Yaakov, first coming to you on this. About 10 days into this U.S. operation, as I like to call it here, the Trump administration appears just taking a decidedly different track than the Biden administration had here now, hitting Houthi harder while directly addressing Iran as the puppet master in the situation. Does that appear to be the summary of what we're seeing from the U.S. at this point?
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of firepower and action, the U.S. is going only after the Houthis as of now, but it's definitely signaling, it's sending signals to Iran that Iran has got to disband its nuclear program, or it could be next. The U.S. Trump administration has never made it clear who would be the one to take on the Iranian nuclear program if it comes to that, Israel or the U.S. or both. But certainly the U.S. is trying to leverage its willingness to strike the Houthis, to signal to the Iranians, look, the days of U.S. restraint are over. When the U.S. says something, it means it. And I think, no less importantly, who else is watching these sustained American strikes on the Houthis? And they are sustained, and I think they are broad in scale. The Saudis are watching, and that's very significant because the Saudis themselves were fighting the Houthis for years, and the Houthi missiles and drones were being sent at Saudi cities and military bases and oil installations for years. Then the Biden administration came along and slapped an arms embargo on the Saudis, And that's why when the Americans under Biden went back to war, and this is not a real war, of course, it was a very limited operation, the Saudis didn't join. They didn't join that task force because they never trusted the U.S. willingness to follow through. Now things are different, so I think we do need to look at how Gulf states, who have been very negatively affected by the Houthis, how they will respond. Right now, the signal being sent from America is very clear that there's a new era right now in the Middle East, and Iranian puppets like the Houthis, armed by the Iranians, destabilizing the region and attacking international trade and Israel, they will be met by force night after night. This is a very important message, and I would suggest to us here in Israel to be patient because the Americans are working on the Yemen file, so I think we can take some comfort in that.
Certainly a new chapter in the situation around that. And again, they keep firing at us, so not a dull moment on that front, like so many others. Jacob, thanks for being with us on that one. Of course, we'll stay with us, gentlemen. More topics to bring the way of our viewers here. Now, the Israeli government, with Prime Minister Netanyahu clearly at the wheel, is on a critical mission to pass a state budget by the end of the month. That's to hold on to their coalition, to hold it together. But in the process, they appear to be once again tearing at the fragile seams of Israel's diverse and war-weary society. The most sensitive issues on the table are the ongoing and suddenly urgent efforts to oust the Shin Bet security chief and the attorney general, with Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir the latest to unleash his accusations against them both, and the hugely controversial efforts by this government to provide enormous sums of welfare to the large ultra-Orthodox communities and exempt them from national service. It's an issue extremely hurtful to so many who have served and sacrificed in the last year and a half of war. Salt was poured in the wound as a video emerged this week of the most prominent ultra-Orthodox politician, chairman of the United Torah Judaism faction and Minister of Housing, Yitzhak Goldknopf, dancing to a new anti-army service song, gleefully singing the lamentable refrain, quote, "We will die before we enlist," close quote. Back in the studio again with you both, gentlemen. Look, Balir, coming to you on this one here. Where do things appear to stand? First of all, start at the top of this. The Attorney General, the Shin Bet chief. These are things the government seems to be trying to push through. What's the status report on this? Is this something that's going to happen very soon, or are they hitting, bumps in the road with this effort?
No, apparently it's going to take a long, long time before we know the final decision. And I guess the final word would be said by the Supreme Court in Israel that is apparently going to deal with a lot of petitions that are going to be filed to it as well. So we see that there is no shortage of political controversies inside Israel, and things heated up really bad yesterday after a report inside Israeli media, or from Israeli media, that said that the chief of the Shin Bet, the Shabak itself, wanted to open an investigation into the police force because they thought that there are elements inside the police force that are connected to Kahanism, which is a banned political party in Israel, very right-wing, of course, extreme right-wing. And they want to know whether that's happening or not. And now, later on, the Shabak denied actually that they opened an investigation, but they indicated that they have opened a probe or examination. And it turned out that there has nothing been it turned out that their suspicions were untrue. Okay. Now, the Minister of National Security, also right-wing, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's overseeing the police force, of course, said that Bar, the chief of the Shin Bet, is a criminal. That's what he accused him. And he said that he is undermining the foundation of the democratic regime. By the way, just a short while ago, he asked the prime minister to open an investigation into what happened, and he called that a military coup. So we see things actually heating up very, very bad.
Like a physical altercation.
Yes, exactly.
In a meeting.
That's at least according to reports, yes. That happened yesterday after the Israeli media report about this. Now, this is happening in a week after firing of the head of the Shin Bet, in the same day that the process of ousting the Attorney General Gali Baharav Meyaar started. And this Wednesday also is going to be a huge issue as well, where the government is going to vote on the judges appointing committee, the committee that appoints the judges, something that the right-wing or anti-government camps see as undemocratic, see that Israel is undermining, or the Israeli government is undermining the Israeli democracy in general. So we see there's no shortage of controversies on one hand. On the other hand, it's going to take a long time until we know the final decision, which means that during this time, we're going to see lots of protests, lots of clashes between the protesters and the police. That's something that is, of course, not very, it's not a good thing, especially while we are still in a state of war.
It's almost hard to believe this is the minefield of political issues arrayed before us just in the next week as we're embarking on so much. And Jakob Labin, thanks for being with us on all the subjects so far. We do have another guest to introduce to you here. Glad to be joined by senior journalist from Yediot Ahronot, Ben-Dror Yemeni. Ben-Dror, good to have you back on with me here. Look, it seems there's robust protesters. There's a lot of them out in the streets right now. Can't decide which banner to carry at these demonstrations. I mean, there's just too many issues out there. Of all those boiling over as we speak, what's the most pressing? What would you say the most consequential issue is to your mind?
Enlisting the ultra-Orthodox, yeshiva buchos. This is the main issue, actually. And if there is one issue where Netanyahu will never have a majority, I'm speaking about the public opinion, speaking about the voters, this is the issue. So here he is trying to find a way to exempt the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, from being enlisted to the army. He doesn't find, by the way, the best legislation in order to do it. Yeah. That's something that we have to bear in mind. And the most important thing is, when they are singing, we are going to die, but not to be enlisted, actually what they're saying is, we want you to die, all the others, the people who are enlisted to the army, we want you to die, but we are not going to be enlisted, which is terrible, which is unacceptable by something like 90% of the Israeli public opinion.
But given all that, Ben-Dror, given all that, there's real pressure on this government. There's the Widowed Wives Forum. I mean, there are serious people who are approaching this government demanding answers, through their anger and their anguish over this. Are they getting any explanations from this government? I mean, will this happen regardless, do you think?
No, he doesn't speak with the Israeli media, as we all know. I mean, you can try to interview him, but he will refuse because he is not speaking to us, journalists. He is not speaking to us, to the media. He's speaking only to his, cabinet members and others and politicians, but he's not speaking to the people. He cannot actually face the criticism. Unfortunately, he's going to do the worst thing to the Israeli society.
It feels like the Prime Minister is just speaking to a base of ultra-Orthodox and far right with these issues right now. Is that what, is his base reduced to that at this point?
Yeah, but it's even more than that. But it's not, a kind of dispute between right-wingers and left-wingers, because you can hear and see all the religious people, the Zionist religious people. They are totally against him.
Even disproportionately died in this war, I want to say as well, serving and dying on the front lines.
Yeah, of course. And this in disproportion to the share in the society, we have to say. And yet, he's doing it against his own base. That's why I'm saying this is the main issue. All the other issues, yes, well, it's not something which we can like, but this is the main issue that is going to actually decrease his power, his strength in the Israeli society.
Look, the opposition, the political opposition, characterized, they're going berserk. Or they're pulling their hair out. They're basically, this is an extreme moment I'm seeing for them. It began with the attempts to oust the Shin Bet chief right now, Ronen Bar. The opposition is calling for insurrection, screaming at that we're entering a dictatorship. What can be done? Does it start and end with this sort of efforts against the Attorney General and the intelligence chief?
Well, this kind of dispute between the head of the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is himself actually coming from the Kahanist movement. Kahanist movement, to people who do not understand, this is the most, the extreme right, the racist extreme right of Israel. I mean, he's coming from there. And this kind of dispute is kind of ridiculous. I mean, what we are talking about? I mean, if we have, from one hand, we have this kind of hero. Let me tell you. I mean, he served in the army. Ben-Gvir did not even serve in the army. And he was in so many battles in order to defend Israel. And what is Ben-Gvir? What is Ben-Gvir? I mean, it's just ridiculous even to think about this kind of situation, this kind of dispute. But unfortunately, this is what we are facing right now in this coalition.
Ben-Dror, do you think they're going to pass the budget? Do you think they'll succed to hold the coalition together, pass the budget by the deadline this month?
Yes. Actually, we do not have the members of the coalition. They are a bunch of, let me tell you, of rabbits, not of people that you can really. It's a shame. It's a shame that they are going to vote for this kind of budget in the middle of a conflict with 7 fronts. And what you are doing, you are taking so much money, milliards, actually, billions, to what? To what? To this kind of political movement, to this kind of yeshivas, to people who do not serve in the army. It is quite regrettable. It's a shame.
We appreciate you on. Ben-Dror Yemeni, who's been covering governments in this country for decades. Important for our viewers to hear your words in this moment. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Now, oil prices, as we move on from the domestic turmoil here, we look at global oil prices, but it ties in here. And oil prices, they climbed today as investors weighed the impact of fresh U.S. sanctions on Iranian exports against talks to end the war in Ukraine, which could increase supply of Russian crude to global markets. Now, the U.S. on Thursday issued new sanctions intended this time to hit the Iranian oil exports, including what the State Department said were the first U.S. measures targeting a Chinese refinery processing the crude from Iran. Now, comments from U.S. President Trump also provided many traders around the world with some hope that previously announced tariffs in early April may not be as burdensome as feared. There's a lot to get into there. So we're joined now by Julien Matonnier, the oil markets economist at Energy Intelligence, joining us from France. Thanks for being with us. Look, how significant for world markets do you think to see the U.S. right now going so hard against Iranian oil, really for the first time in some years?
A good day to you. I think the U.S. is going after an end buyer, a final buyer for the first time. I think it's called Shandong Shunguang Luqing. But it's one of the biggest buyers among the independent Chinese refiners. They're often referred as teapot. The name teapot comes from the size, because those refineries are often very small. And the one under sanction has an official refining capacity of 60,000 barrels per day. So it's pretty small. It's a drop in the ocean of the vast oil market. The problem is teapots are far less sophisticated than your average refiner, like the giant private refineries that have emerged in China since 2019 or China's state-owned refineries. The teapots have been able to survive mainly by running discounted oil from Iran and Russia. And if you take that away from them, then basically those refiners are going to face financing, payment difficulties. The government may have to rescue them to save local jobs in an already weak Chinese economy. And second, Iranian sellers, will have to offer bigger discounts to absorb, the higher freight cost if their fleet is targeted by the US. So, there's a change in tone that has put the market on edge, and traders are a bit nervous, at least, the Chinese buyers.
Julian, how much does this look like the makings of a grand bargain between the United States and Russia?
Well, it's difficult to say. The peace talks have been in everybody's mind. The trading community has been very critical about a possible truce, at least, if not like a full-fledged peace between Russia and China. I mean, it's a lot of oil that could potentially come back on the market. Of course, all the big traders, like the large independent trading house, will be back to it as soon as it's, perfectly legal, right, which means that a lot of oil will get back to some places. However, as you know, Europe is very reluctant to get back to the old ways. So, it's difficult to say who's going to buy, who's not going to buy at this point. What we are sure of is that probably some products will be back, refined product. Think about diesel, for example, will be back to Europe if that happens. So, things are going to change again. You're going to see another reshuffle of oil flows, as you've seen, after the war in Ukraine. And every time we've got new sanctions, we've got, new announcement of tariffs, you can see that the oil flows are constantly sort of reshuffling along new routes or, new sort of directions.
Julien Montagnier, complex world of the oil markets here. Thanks for breaking it down for us, the latest.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Now, state prosecutors here in Israel, they filed an indictment at the Beersheba District Court charging treason against a 65-year-old resident of the Gaza periphery town of Netivot for having allegedly conducted spying activities on behalf of Iran. Now, prosecutors say that Edward Yusupov, an immigrant from Azerbaijan, received a $41,000 payment for his work, a list of offenses which carry up to 15 years in prison. The allegations say he collected, photographed, and documented sensitive information about what they termed national infrastructure sites around the country, including IDF bases, military sites in the Haifa port, as well as parks, libraries, zoos, commercial and leisure centers where we all go. So it's an ongoing case here in Israel. We'll keep you updated also. Now, the U.S. government has alleged that Columbia University student and pro-Palestinian demonstrator Mahmoud Khalil withheld that he worked for the United Nations Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA, on his visa application, and that could be grounds for deportation. Now, the administration detained him on March 8th and is seeking to throw him out, but it's been a tricky one. It's generating protests and legal pushback. It's the first time we've seen the employment within UNRWA as potential grounds for the U.S. throwing someone out. And various countries in Europe and elsewhere, well, they've emerged since the atrocity of October 7th to champion Palestinian statehood. And that's despite the fractured governance system within Palestinian society and dominant jihadist elements. But one such place is Norway, where the government has stood out for its clear side in this war. I-24 News correspondent Adi Cohen from our Hebrew channel went there and gives us this eye-opening expose.
18 months of prolonged and bloody war in the Middle East have managed, it seems, to make its way all the way to the remote regions of Scandinavia. Ripples, some would say, which verge on a tsunami.
To resist the injustices done by our government in our name.
Since the October 7 massacre, and despite its echoing horrors, Norway has become one of the countries in Europe most hostile to Israel.
Norway was among the very first Western countries to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. We have condemned the violations of international humanitarian law.
Anerkjennelse av Palestina en støtte til moderate krefter som på vikende front I en langvarig og grusom konflikt.
In the past year and a half, this hostility has been expressed through Norway's harsh condemnations of Israel, with Oslo even going so far as to file a lawsuit against Israel in The Hague. Then there is also Norway's campaign to defend and support UNRWA, as well as its recognition of a Palestinian state. And not forgetting the Norwegian government's ban on the kingdom, sending its condolences for the massacre, or recognizing Hamas as a declared terrorist organization. A hostile sentiment which is also expressed out on the streets, almost in every corner.
But the government bears the largest responsibility. But the government sees that anti-Israel moves and rhetoric is popular also with the large chunk of the population. Only a few days after the massacre, there was a change of Minister of Foreign Affairs in Norway. He, Espen Barth Eide, he has single-handedly, together with the Prime Minister, changed the Norwegian policy towards Israel.
We need to establish a Palestinian government, a Palestinian state, and the Palestinian state has to be recognized.
Party decided to adopt about full economic boycott of Israel, and they are now working to make it the policy of the party itself.
Almost every week, the streets of the capital, Oslo, are flooded with mass demonstrations. But even away from them, the locals advise me when I visit to avoid Israeli symbols or even not to speak Hebrew.
You could have some unpleasant experiences, unfortunately, especially from young Muslim men, but also from ethnic Norwegian leftists.
I think in Norway we have quite a strange situation, coincidence, where especially the left side of a political sphere is very Palestinian-friendly. Palestinian cause is almost a part of the left-wing politics in Norway. I became aware of it after October 7 that people are basically blinded. Doesn't matter what Israel does, what Israel says, they will always be against Israel.
And as in too many destinations where the anti-Israel climate triumphs over public consciousness without any real counter-reactions, anti-Semitism raises its head.
We've got people that's been beaten up. We had people who had to go in hiding in a way as well. People had things written on the door. Luckily, I live just out of Oslo.
For being Jews or being Israeli supporters?
Both. Last year, he was a Christian Norwegian guy, got beaten up actually.
Why?
Because he had an Israeli flag. I grew up in a beautiful country. Norway is actually quite beautiful. I never had problems being a Jew in Norway. Never felt any anti-Semitism at all when I grew up. My upbringing was different from what my kids has felt. Knew the last 20 years it started to become tougher to live in Norway.
For some, it probably has root in anti-Semitism, but I'm not eager to put that label on it. 33% of the Norwegian public says that their conception about Israel affects what they think about Jews in general.
Our few supporters in Norway attribute the hostile discourse against Israel mainly to the rampant disinformation fueled by the local media, schools, and well-funded pro-Palestinian organizations.
There was a survey done last year where 50% of the Norwegians said Israel treats the Palestinians as badly as Jews were treated during the Second World War.
Wow.
50%. There are very widespread misconceptions in the Norwegian public about Israel's situation. More than 20% says that as long as the state of Israel exists, there cannot be peace in the world. It's a result of not only bias in the media, but also in the textbooks in school, where they learn the story only almost according to the Palestinian narrative, and you don't get the Israeli story.
For the past 2 decades, Conrad has been running MIF, a non-religious pro-Israel organization which has supported a distant Jewish state since the 70s. In the past year and a half, the reality has become particularly charged and tense.
We have had several instances when meetings and events have been disturbed by anti-Israel activists. That feels threatening. We have had to pay tens of thousands of euros in having security companies help us during events and meetings. The Norwegian government has not spoken out against this mob that is threatening and intimidating. There has been a few violent incidents against friends of Israel, and I'm also concerned that this has not been condemned strongly.
I get a lot of hate from it almost every day, and sometimes at work, but I always say my opinion. Even when I'm at work, I say that I support Israel. I get told that I support child murders, that I'm a Nazi, which makes no sense.
We met MIF members at a weekend of consolidation and enrichment for the organization's young people in one of the forests of Norway, far from the radar of the protesters.
So my father is a Jew, so I always knew about Israel, but I never thought that much about the politics side of it before October 7th. And then when I saw a brutal massacre of people in Israel and everything what followed, I became very interested in the political side of things. And I think that Israel have the better argument. I also have a strong opinion about media reaction in Norway to the conflict.
History in Europe and in the Muslim world cries to us that there is a need for the Jewish people to be sovereign in their own land.
Thus, the work of those organizations like MIF enters a place where the state has failed for years in the propaganda war, while clearly underestimating the real threat inherent in the growing wave of hatred against Israel, which, as a consequence of this, is directed at Israelis and Jews around the world.
When it comes to in terms of the Norwegian public, unfortunately, the Norwegian public has been accidentally brainwashed by seeing just pictures and photos. As of course, they're devastating, but they see only one side of the conflict.
Very ashamed that we have paid for Hamas support. I want to say that you have people here that actually know the truth and see your suffering, and we will never stop.
We are here, and we're going to be here. But I think we're going to win the struggle in the end. But it's going to be a tough fight. But we will win the struggle both in Israel and here as well.
Thank you, Adi, bringing us that story from Norway. Some of the upside there, past a lot of the noise we see in the streets. This brings us to the end of the broadcast this hour. Again, any live updates, you'll catch them right here on I-24 News, whether it be rocket fire out of Gaza, missiles from Yemen, or many other developments on the domestic and political landscape as well. So stay tuned here on I-24 News. For now, I'm David Matlin, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. We'll see you again with much more in the hours to come.
Dance, music, and magic immerse you in the story of Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, an unforgettable musical where the past and present meet. Welcome to the heart of the most sought-after city in the world. A unique experience only at Kikar HaMusika. Reserve now at thisisjerusalem.co.il.
Introducing the brand new I-24 News Video On Demand app. You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions and expert commentary, all at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News Video On Demand app today. The 7th of October set in motion a chain of events. Today, Israel's enemies are severely weakened, but not defeated, and the balance of power is shifting. This region never rests. And for its own survival, Israel needs to keep its finger on the pulse. If you want to better understand, if you want to hear voices you won't hear elsewhere, then tune in daily to Middle East Now on I-24 News. Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are? Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website. On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it. So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Welcome to Jewish World Weekly on I-24 News. I'm Emily Francis. Each week, we're focusing on stories, issues, and personalities of Jewish interest, both here in Israel and throughout the global Jewish community, the diaspora. And we're starting with our top 5 items in the Jewish world, presented by Sarah Rogers. Hi, Sarah.
Thanks, Emily. Here are the top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. A Dutch court has convicted 4 men for their roles in the attacks on Maccabi Tel Aviv fans in Amsterdam last November. The 4 men, aged between 22 and 32, have been sentenced for anti-Semitic threats, attacking the Israeli fans, and pointing out their locations. They have been jailed for between 1 to 3 months in the attacks that Israel called a, quote, pogrom. The US Justice Department has created a new task force designed to prosecute terrorists who were involved in October 7th. Called JTF 10-7, the Justice Department says that they will investigate acts of terrorism by individuals and entities providing support and financing to Hamas, related Iran proxies and their affiliates, as well as acts of anti-Semitism by these groups. This comes amid a crackdown from the Trump administration on college campus protest leaders. A handful of European personalities are boycotting a conference on anti-Semitism set up by the Israeli government itself because of its invitation to European far-right political groups. Individuals including the chief rabbi of the UK, Ephraim Mervis, French intellectual Bernard-Henri Lévy, and ADL chief Jonathan Greenblatt are some of the names that have been pulled out of the conference, citing its inclusion of far-right politicians from France, Spain, and Hungary. This comes as the Israeli Foreign Ministry has been openly reaching out to the pro-Israel far-right parties of Europe. Gal Gadot has become the first Israeli actress to have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The star of Wonder Woman and the recently released Snow White movie was emotional as she became the 2,804th recipient of the star, saying, quote, "If a girl from Rosh Hashanah can get a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, then anything is possible." Dozens protested the event, citing Gadot's support for her home country and the IDF. And a medieval manuscript, believed to be the oldest Jewish book in the world, is now on display in New York City. The 1,300-year-old book was discovered in Afghanistan in 1997 and was written by Jews who lived among the Buddhists who ruled the Bamiyan Valley. Known as the Afghan Siddur, it features poems, prayers, and the Passover Haggadah. Those are your top 5 items in the Jewish world this week. Back to you, Emily.
A monumental election for the 2025 World Zionist Congress in the wake of the October 7th massacre and subsequent war against Hamas. Now, for the first time since 2020, elections are being held for a seat at the table in shaping Israel's future, influencing Jewish communities worldwide and supporting Zionism. And in the first week of voting, twice as many people cast ballots than 5 years ago. And the winning 152 delegates will, from the U.S. will join representatives from all around the world. And we are joined now from New York by Herbert Bloch, the executive director of the American Zionist Movement, which organizes the World Zionist Congress elections. Hello, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me to talk about this.
Yes, this is, I know, a very important election at such a pivotal time in the story of the Jewish people. Please, if you can, explain to our viewers the role. Many know the World Zionist Congress, but not exactly what the role entails. So please share that for us.
So thank you. The Zionist Congress that will meet this October is the 39th World Zionist Congress, continuing directly in the footsteps of the Zionist Congress convened by Theodor Herzl. And the modern Zionist Congress is a global Jewish parliament. It's a grassroots body of 525 delegates elected from around the world, from almost 40 countries, who come together in October every 5 years to set the direction and policy for the national institutions of Israel, the Mosdot Halumim, which are the World Zionist Organization, the Jewish Agency for Israel, Karen Kayemet L'Israel, Jewish National Fund, and the Karen HaYesod. And these sort of quasi-governmental institutions that are the link between Israel and the Jewish diaspora worldwide together allocate over $1 billion a year in funding for different projects, and not just funding, but priorities for how those institutions allocate their resources. over the coming years. And American Jews are about a third, the delegates from America are about a third of those at the Zionist Congress, and American Jews have an opportunity to participate in directly electing those representatives. There are 22 different parties running in an election that started on March 10th and continues until May 4th. And voting is done online through the American Zionist Movement, AZM, which is the Zionist Federation in the United States. We're the umbrella convening body, and we organize the election in the United States for American Jews.
So obviously, I imagine you're not surprised so far. The turnout just in the beginning has doubled from the last time. Clearly, things have changed. What does this tell us? Is it a different kind of person than years past? Are we seeing younger people wanting to take on this role in light of all the advocacy that has followed October 7th?
So there are, as I mentioned, 22 different slates. We knew there was greater interest in the last election. There were 14. There are many new parties that have come forward to run in the election, different segments of the Jewish community that are actively involved. There are more young candidates, many activists from colleges who are involved in different slates. And in general, we're seeing a resurgence of interest in Zionism. You know, while the Jewish people in the state of Israel have been under attack, many people want to rally around our community, around Zionism, and stand up for Zionism and say, you know, this is a moment where I want to be involved. I want to have a say. I want to reaffirm my Zionism or express my opinion. So some of this interest began even before October 7th. There was a lot of interest in the Jewish diaspora and the American Jewish community about debates going on in Israel around the judicial reform and the Kotel and all sorts of other issues, even before October 7th. And obviously, since October 7th, the community has rallied together, and there are a lot more people who are involved in this. I see you're showing a little video in the background there. We do have a video on the AZM website that explains this election and why it's important for people to participate. It takes, less than 5 minutes to vote. It's very easy, and it costs $5, which covers the cost of the election and verification of the voter and processing. And as of now, the turnout is almost double, or excuse me, more than double where it was 5 years ago in this election.
Wow, incredible, and obviously a very pivotal year with a lot of work ahead for the Congress. Thank you very much, Herbert Bloch, the Executive Director of the American Zionist Movement. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
He's a Jewish comedian who continues to find humor even the most challenging times. Modi has been taking his unique shtick on the road, bringing laughs and relief to audiences all over the world.
We recently did 23andMe. It said 99.8% Jewish. That was it. The pie chart was a matzo ball with a toothpick in it. The results came back in Yiddish. Then they give you your health risks. What are my health risks? The hypertension, the cholesterol? No, Nazis. Nazis and Kanye. That's my health risks.
And we are now so happy to be joined by Modi. Hello, my friend in New York. Good to see you.
How are you? You put a clip on with no laugh track from the audience. So that was probably, it's like someone, oh, let's go see a show with no laughter.
But you don't need a laugh track because you get the live laughs in real time. Obviously, Kanye, I mean, this is not a new clip that we saw. Kanye keeps giving a reason for comedians to come up with stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, not just him, everybody.
Yes.
There's so much happening nonstop. It just doesn't stop. You have to, you can, because anything you do 1 week, the following week, people already forgot about it.
I know. That must be pretty complicated being a comedian, because it's true. Every week is a brand new chapter. So, here you are in a way between two worlds. You got your Jewish comedy, you love Israel, and now here you are with a whole new layer, I guess you could say, in the past few months. So I imagine you're getting a lot of material with what's going on right now.
I'm getting a lot of material. We are on a full new hour from the Know Your Audience show that's already out, and it's called Pause for Laughter because it's exactly what people need now. Just have you know, with all that you're being bombarded with news and it doesn't. You just don't know what's happening in the ceasefire, no ceasefire. You just need to take a few moments to just laugh. And that's why I like to have our podcast and our Instagram. Whenever you land on our page, there's a laugh. It's not news. It's not anything groundbreaking. It's just easy.
And explain why, you know, I mean, we all know this, but why laughter and sometimes dark humor is a way to get through dark times, so to speak.
I literally have people tell me at the meet and greet after the shows, it goes, before I go to bed at night, I just watch a few of your clips and then I can fall. It's like it takes them, you know, out of the whole world of what's happening around them, or if it is about what's going on in the world, it's with humor and they can laugh and they can share it with their friends. And it's just literally pausing for laughter and however you can do it, comedy, stand up, make you, you know, I always say, be the friend that brings their friends to the comedy show. You know, even if it's not me, go see a comedy show, bring a few friends. It's the best thing you can do.
For sure. Now tell us about your tour. I mean, you're going to be in the States and you're going to be going to Germany. So I imagine, I know you have a pretty loyal audience there. I mean, how do you make, you know, jokes about back in the day?
Well, we're finishing up a big leg of the Americas, being in America. We just did Los Angeles. We have a few shows left. And then we're going to Manchester, Munich, Geneva, Antwerp, and Warsaw. We'll be performing in Warsaw. It's Warsaw, Poland. This Jewish comedy is coming to Warsaw, Poland.
That is, have you found that sometimes the audiences in these places, it's also healing for them, given the history I mean, are you nervous making these jokes there?
No, I'm never. The audience is going to be amazing, and they speak English, and they're great, and it's just the whole thought of it, you know, not that long ago, 80 years ago, whatever it was, they were collecting us into train stations, and now we're coming together and having comedy night, you know. And there's a Jewish community that's like kind of there, and they're coming to laugh. It's Mashiach energy is what it is.
And I mean, when you are able to travel and go to different places, do you find that each city, each community has its own energy?
Can I tell you something? Whenever we go anywhere, something organic happens. People reach out to us, the head of the community or some restaurant or somebody that says, hey, we have a museum thing happening this week. Why don't you come? Or everywhere we go, any city we go to, from Venice to England and to London and all of that. And there's always something organic happens with my audience. And it's fun. And we post about it and we talk about it and that's like a lot of what the podcast is about. Yeah. And it's great. And it's organic. It's not pushed or forced, you know? Which is so pleasant. Okay, quick, 30 seconds. I have an idea. Why haven't there ever been a comedy jam? You get Kanye, you get Chappelle, and let's just have a debate through comedy. Has anyone thought of that before? I always think about that, and I always think, you know, that the comedians should be running stuff. And there is an Iranian comedian that I'll be doing a show with, and that's just it, just like bringing that energy together of just comedy as you know, like I always said, I've said it on this show, the Knesset, the Congress, all the governments, when they begin, they should start with 5 minutes of comedy. Yeah. And then start their arguing and debating. And, you know, imagine in the Knesset, right before they start screaming at each other, there's somebody just doing 5 minutes of comedy or maybe challenge one of the Knesset members to do it, you know, and just that's what it is. Not a bad idea. I strongly suggest now, and I really suggest making comedy a part of your life. Go see comedy shows, especially mine, and take it to our website. And there's always some show near you, or let your friend know who's near one of my shows that, hey, go see this show. Bring a little laughter into your life, and it's so good. Clearly the best medicine. Modi, thank you so much. Good to see you next year in Israel.
It's been a grueling few months for Los Angeles after multiple fires left thousands without homes and without their nostalgic possessions, which were left in ashes. Well, now the LA chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women has banded together to help those who need not only the basic essentials, but also the things that make us happy. I-24 News correspondent Joe Brown has the story.
Providing relief for those who lost everything.
We've been collecting donated goods, both new and gently used, and doing an enormous amount of sorting to really put the best goods that we received here so that folks who have been impacted by the fires can benefit directly from all this support from the community and really feel the love of Los Angeles.
A brand new 20,000 square foot fire relief center has opened up in Altadena, Southern California, to help people who were affected by the Eaton fire that ravaged Los Angeles in January this year. Set up by the LA chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women, the relief fund will be selling essentials such as toiletries and hygiene products, but will also allow those who lost their homes, possessions or jobs in the fire to shop in comfort.
I think a lot of donated goods, people receive bags of things that may or may not fit and may or may not accommodate their own style. And here, we're hoping people can have an experience that feels warm and normal and really helps them to start to feel like things are the same as they were or that they can be again.
It also adds an air of normalcy in these tricky times.
The importance of doing it now versus a couple months ago is at that time, people maybe got some things that they needed urgently, a couple outfits to wear, but they have to replace an entire closet and for their children and for their spouses and partners, and that's what we're trying to do here.
The center will remain open for a month and has been heavily relying on kind donations from the public.
Jews around the world recently celebrated Purim, a holiday of dressing up in costumes and experiencing joy. And this year, a special exhibition in Ferrara, Italy, is showing how history is coming full circle in an amazing way. A rare illustrated Queen Esther scroll that was inscribed in the northern Italian city over 400 years ago has come home. Joining us now from Ferrara, Italy, is Amedeo Spagnoletto, the director of the National Museum of Italian Judaism and the Shoah. He's also one of the curators of the exhibition Bellissima Esther. Buongiorno.
Buongiorno to you, Emily, and all the people who are seeing us.
We're very happy to have you joining us. I know that the museum is a labor of love. It took several years to build. It's still quite new. Tell us about the museum and why a lot of the unknown history of the Italian Jews notable over millennia. Tell us more.
We established the museum at the end of the 2017 with a very important exhibition devoted to the first 1,000 years of the preeminence of the Jews here in Italy. That recalls from the 2 centuries before the normal era. But right now, in these 5 years that we passed, we are almost to the 8 years of the activities of our museum. We had a very important exhibition devoted to the ghetto era and also to the Renaissance era, because it's so important, Ferrara, with this crucial period of the Renaissance that is in the same case connected also with this Megillah that was illuminated by Moshe Poscarolo, and now is one of the most important loan that we had in this important exhibition devoted to Purim.
It really is so beautiful. I know it's ironic. It was made there, and it's been in the National Library in Israel, and now, they're loaning it. So on loan was something that generated from there, and you're right. You think of the Renaissance, people equate Florence and, Venice, but Ferrara was a very important center for publishing, and the Jews were very involved in that craft, correct?
Yes, exactly. From the middle period, the Jews settled here in Ferrara, but the most important period of their presence here in Ferrara was connected with the house of Este, when in the beginning of the 60th centuries, all the Marranos and the Sephardic people, very, very many people coming from Spain and Portugal came here welcomed by the House of Esten, and was the centuries when there was a very brilliant permanence and also producing. You spoke about the House of Publishing for perhaps you mentioned you wanted to speak about the Usque family who published the very well an important edition of the Bible translated in Spanish, and was also thanks to one figure that operated here just for a couple of years, 3 years, that was Gracia Nassi.
Yep.
That that was a Marranos, and after came back to the Judaism when he settled here in Italy, in Venice, and after in Ferrara, coming at the end to Istanbul, and was an interpreter, very important with her family.
She was such an important figure. Also, the Ferrara Bible, it was the first Sefer Torah in Ladino that was actually made in Ferrara as well, yeah?
Yes, was in Spanish languages, and is very well. And we have one copy here in Ferrara at the city library, and we had it for a while here in the museum.
Let's quickly talk, because we're almost out of time, and this is for another era. But listen, Jewish people have been in Italy since Roman times, some say before. Why is it so important, the fact that it's a national museum in the country which we've seen a lot of anti-Semitism has also been supportive of this institution? Explain why that's very important.
Of course, this institution is very important also to fight concretely the anti-Semitism, and specifically in this period, I want to underline a lot of schools coming here to know better or to come across a knowledge about the presence of the Judaism here in Italy. Because here in Italy, there are a lot of, just a couple of important communities, but the presence of and also the synagogues and cemeteries of the Jewish are present in very important places here in Italy. And through our museum, the people, and especially the alums, the schools, the classes can come across with a new knowledge that bring them to understand the presence of the Judaism here in Italy, and also to behave better through the Jews.
All right, God willing. All right, thank you so much, Amadeo Spagnoletto. Much appreciated, and we'll see you in Ferrara soon. I'm coming.
I wait all the audience coming here in Ferrara to see the museum and the city. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao.
Now turning to an amazing organization, Shalva. It's based here in Israel that provides care programs for children with all kinds of disabilities. And it started in a small apartment with 8 children, and it's now celebrating its 35th anniversary with a huge gala in New York, raising millions of dollars. I-24 News correspondent Nicole Zedek was at the celebration and filed this report.
Here in New York City, more than 500 guests have gathered for a very special occasion, the 35th anniversary of Shalva, the Israeli Association for the Care and Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities. 35 years ago, this organization started as a small operation. In fact, I spoke to the founder and president of how it all got started. Here's what he had to say.
Began 35 years ago as a result of my own son's medical problem at the age of 11 months. He became blind and deaf. Everybody wrote him off. And at the age of 8, he had a miraculous breakthrough to communication, the Helen Keller breakthrough. And my wife had made a promise that if God ever helps her son, she'll dedicate her life to helping other mothers with their children. And she turned to me and said, I made a promise, God delivered, it's payback time. We started a couple of years later with 5 children, and here we are 35 years later serving 2,000 families, parents every week.
It's truly amazing to see exactly how they've grown over the past 35 years. In fact, I also spoke to one of the chairmen of the organization who gave me an example of one of the families that they've been able to help just recently, in fact. Take a listen.
My friend who just made Aliyah from Brazil has a 3.5-year-old daughter who is on the spectrum, has a disability. And he said he and his wife went from a very unhappy life in Brazil to a happy life in Israel because of Shalva. Because Shalva gives them the ability to live their lives with help.
Tonight alone, this 35th anniversary gala has raised more than $3 million to all go straight into the Shalva organization. And there's one guest of honor here tonight as well who has a big name for herself, Montana Tucker. She actually visited the Shalva house in Israel when she was there last. She said it was one of the most amazing experiences for her as well.
My experience at Shalva when I went to Israel was truly unforgettable. I probably mentioned this in my speech tonight, but from the second I walked in there, I had a smile on my face the entire time. The way that the staff cares for every single person there, and you can tell that all of the people there love all of the staff so much. And you can tell it's an unconditional love and support of one another. And I'm honored that I got a chance to dance with some of the kids there. And, they say that I brought them joy, but truly they brought me joy.
So you can see and hear truly the amazing work that this organization has been doing over the past 35 years, and they continue to grow, really expanding their grasp not only in Israel, not only in the United States, but all throughout Europe as well, as the organization does aim to help as many people as they can and families with disabilities as well. Reporting in New York City for I-24 News, I'm Nicole Zedek.
And that is all for this week's episode